All Elite Wrestling have promised vast change within pro wrestling. No more of this, or whatever the hell this is, basically. And though the product has to be judged on itself, rather than the platitudes so far spouted by Cody Rhodes et al., this list will feature practices the AEW crew have to steer a million miles away from. And I don't just mean doing the opposite of whatever TNA were doing in 2010. Wrestlers have always been at the whims of promoters, and though it's perhaps the biggest actual difference AEW could possibly proffer, it'll prove one of the hardest to push through. Bosses being bastards has often brought the best out of competitive contenders, subversely proving that an acceptable level of abuse in pro wrestling is somehow an acceptable way to behave. Personally, I wanted to call this list 10 times Vince was a dick, but apparently that's not allowed. Instead, I'm Adam Wilborn from WhatCulture, and these are 10 dick moves promoters used to improve wrestlers' performances. Number 10. Never supporting Kevin Owens. The WWE Network 365 special on AJ Styles last year was a rather pleasant stroll along a very hard road. It was substantially different for Kevin Owens during the pilot edition of the show. The poor Owens 365 felt an awful lot closer to the assumed life of a frustrated performer as he navigated the choppy waters of Vince McMahon's mind. Never sure if he was in favour or out of fashion with his boss, including when he was ruddy Universal Champion, the prizefighter tried and often failed to figure out his footing in a company that dished out and withdrew autonomy and creative control quicker than the Goldberg squash that cost him the title. McMahon in particular was an unapologetic prick to him for so long that it had to be hugely cathartic for Owens when he got to stick his knot on him in a memorable SmackDown Live segment later that year. That's better. Number 9. Threatening and insulting Chris Jericho. Two notable tales from less cordial times between these two best bloody buddies reflect a chairman keen to neg Y2J into proving himself or leaving the company altogether, depending on how he takes the heat. Jericho went on record with McMahon's harshest 1999 volley. Apparently, he said, "You're green as grass and your contract isn't worth the paper it's printed on," which is coincidentally what I got told when I first joined WhatCulture. 2 years later, Vince informed the first ever undisputed champion that he'd be winning with some barbarous banter that wasn't even behind his back. To Undertaker, but deliberately within earshot of Jericho, McMahon allegedly joked that the business has to be going to because they were putting the title on Jericho. Number 8. Burying Triple H. Speaking of doo-doo, Triple H was told to eat platefuls of it and learn to like the taste of it after 3 of his best mates buggered off to WCW, and his other one commanded headline spots up and down the country. But his long overstated burial served as the metal testing exercise that transformed his career. Alright, this might have helped too. He barely won on television and pay-per-view, and the Greenwich Snob gimmick was left for dead by the bosses, although that persona needed binning before he could get anywhere anyway. Hunter recovered quickly and clearly massaged his reputation as the ultimate company man before he became the literal one in the process. Number 7. Overpushing Lex Luger. Poor Lex Luger. Now available to view in painstaking detail on the WWE Network, his Lex Express bus tour between July 4th, 1993 and August the 30th SummerSlam was irrefutably one of Vince McMahon's biggest wastes of money during a financial nadir for his organisation. Oh, and I'm just going to leave this here too. Fitting that a campaign bus was the chosen method of transport to cart Luger around, it was that McMahon threw him under when the attempted elevation had profoundly failed just 3 months later, despite Luger putting on his best fake smile night after night. McMahon didn't drape Luger in yellow, but he did everything else to help audiences forget about Hulk Hogan and embrace a man that had literally been narcissistic to a fault just days before slamming Yokozuna on an aircraft carrier. Number 6. Refusing to let Randy Savage wrestle. Randy Savage had allegedly made no secret of wanting to wrestle rather than announce, but McMahon's ill-conceived new generation branding apparently froze him out. You see, he had to make room for stars like Max Moon Fantasio and Mantar. Savage was only a few years beyond some of the other top stars, and even younger than Bob Backlund, a man who'd win the WWE Championship just weeks after his departure. Far from just taking WCW's money and running, Randy instead revved his engines and shoved his ability back in his old gaffer's face. Reborn as a wrestler throughout 1995 and a draw in 1996, Savage had one of his best ever years in 97 as a heel against great WCW babyface hope Diamond Dallas Page. Oh, and who could forget that classic match he had with Spider-Man in 2002? Number 5. Dismissing AJ Styles' wrestling ability. AJ Styles revealed that Vince McMahon implied he was nothing special between the ropes when they first met. Yeah, it's only AJ Bloody Styles. This was patently absurd, of course, but the chairman was chasing something else from the phenomenal one. And just think about that for a second. He's coming in with that nickname, and the first thing you do is tell him he's crap in the ring. Yet, it worked. It always does. I hate admitting this, but Vince is the greatest worker of them all. Styles took Vince's words and took to them as if he was being told the earth was flat. That's going to make the comments fun. More than happy to prove himself all over again anyway, AJ searched for edges in his game still to be smoothed out, and evidently found them quickly enough to convince his boss that he was a sound and safe choice for WWE Championship glory. Number 4. Mocking Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes was twice a victim of Vince McMahon's vindictiveness in the late 1980s, but only when the joke was literally on him was he able to turn it back around on the wily promoter. McMahon had christened Ted DiBiase's manservant Virgil as a rib on Dusty, real name Virgil Riley Runnels Jr., during his time as a booker and wrestler for Jim Crockett Promotions. But that's nothing compared to when he actually convinced Rhodes to join up with him in 1989. Taking the American dream and attempting to turn him into some sort of July 4th parade in human form, Dusty's working man shtick was instead repurposed as a polka-sporting common man. McMahon logic. Regardless, it mattered not that his polka dot fascination was never explained, nor looked good, or that his dancing didn't exactly jive with the working class hero he'd portrayed so believably. He was simply as good at doing one thing as he was others, and audiences fell in love with him all over again. Number 3. Ignoring and neglecting Neville. It wasn't just Neville's Twitter game that improved when he returned as a, battered heel in late 2016 after a long layoff. Neville didn't just miss out on months of action during his spell on the shelf, he missed out on multiple moments he was desperate to own. WrestleMania, the company's critically acclaimed Cruiserweight Classic, and the inaugural UK Championship Tournament all could and would have benefited from his presence, and the anger stored within him was smartly channeled into a King of the Cruiserweights moniker he wore well for most of 2017. Despite an incredible run of pay-per-view matches and a character that basically carried 205 Live, WWE still didn't seem to care, booking him thoughtlessly against Akira Tozawa, Enzo Amore, that's aged well, and others, when their job should have been to preserve the division's one genuine star. The Newcastle star protested his position by simply stepping away entirely, but WWE refusing to release him early left him in contractual limbo for nearly a full year. Fortunately, the work he'd done despite the relentless dissent had made yearning hearts fonder during his absence. His return to Dragon Gate, select independent appearances, like our very own Defiant Wrestling, and confirmation of his signing with All Elite Wrestling were met with thunderous enthusiasm. Forget the Neville level, Pac is back. Number 2. Burying CM Punk. CM Punk's enraged pipe bomb promo was, if you believe it, a last act of catharsis before he split like everyone else had done. But even if it was all part of a grand work to sell a pay-per-view and he was always intending to sign a new deal, it took him being pissed off about, just about everything to inspire a speech that rousing. It's a wonder the microphone wasn't burned to a crisp, so violent were the flames spewed forth by Punk. He was, in his mind, wronged by a profoundly failing system. The new Nexus, anyone? The straight-edge superstar was becoming the voice of the voiceless by finally careering off the rails. But it's honestly tough to imagine how else things would have gone for the unpredictable star had WWE actually afforded him a modicum of respect. And no, I'm not just talking about people power. McMahon got 3 more years of what sounded like pretty petty mistreatment, and the two made more money together from fighting than they ever would have as friends. Number 1. Screwing Bret Hart. Vince McMahon may have totally destroyed one of the decade's biggest stars when he screwed Bret Hart at Survivor Series 1997, but he made himself an even bigger one in the process and freed space for a hungry young roster to occupy. It was by far the most commercially stupendous bit of shithousery in the history of the industry. Few saw a way out for him post-Montreal 2, but in finally finding the perfect villainous foil for Stone Cold Steve Austin, as he inadvertently had, the sky was again the limit for the man that discovered new heights in the industry a full decade earlier. His business was in rude health, his mind unaffected by a decision that had broken others, and his body never more prepared to be donated to the cause of getting his new stars over. Even when he was an utter bastard, McMahon backdoored into brilliance.